Hello, and welcome back to Inquisitor Martyr. Last time we ended up finishing off the one little segment of Chaos Undivided missions, and because I feel like we're going to run a few Ordo missions. We're going to do Ordo Malleus because they're all just purge missions, so that's pretty straightforward. Should I modify it? I'm stupid, so why not? Yeah, we'll go with that. Huh. Thought I had that. Bonuses to champions, and we'll go... Yeah, we'll go Void Shards. A lot of damage boosts. Okay, that's gonna hurt probably.
Only corruption lies beyond the veil. There is nothing but suffering and death beneath the stars.
So, we got some new Votann news. You know, at this point, the Leagues of Votann news just keeps on coming. And we actually got a look at a bunch of the weapons they'll be using. So, what we have is, it's a mix of kind of... Whoa, actually, that's a lot of health I just lost. I'm gonna stop a second and heal, or not waste a oh wow, I only have 4 inoculator charges. That's not good. Well, so... we got a bunch of new weapons released, and there's the Ion Blaster, the Autok Pattern Bolter, the Bolt Revolver, Bolt Shotgun, Vulcanite Disintegrator, and High-Las Auto Rifle as the first few. I mean, nothing really stands out from that list. The Bolt Shotgun seems pretty neat. We'll have to wait and see how that ends up working, if it's just going to be, like, statistically the same as equipping a standard guardsman with a shotgun, or... I mean, that's my guess. I don't expect it to be anything fancy. Still think it's neat. You know. Well, that was a little sudden. But then our next set of weapons is the Graviton Blast Cannon, SP Conversion Beamer, and the Edekarn Plasma Gun and Plasma Pistol. If you look at the Edekarn Plasma Gun, it's actually the picture, or it's the gun we seem to see in the hands of, I believe it was the first miniature we ever saw, and definitely the first picture of a, I guess it would be Hearthkin soldier for the Leagues of Votann, which is cool. You know, I'm all for it. It's, once again, it's falling somewhat in line with what you'd expect from Imperial Guard. You know, hey, there's plasma. Hey, there's a las gun. There's bolters. Granted, I mean, it's a bolt pistol would be more common with the guard, but, you know, the idea still stands. The interesting thing is stuff like the Graviton Cannon and the SP Conversion Beam, because those, if my memory serves me, fall more in line with Adeptus Mechanicus. So we're looking at, like, new AdMech guns, which is cool. You know, I even complained about it in this game to a degree, where AdMech, even the Tech Adept in this, seem to have a very limited weapon pool, and it seems very strange, the choices made. Because, you know, there's like the Plasma Caliver, and it's like, oh, this is Adeptus Mechanicus. I'm like, anybody can shoot a gun, dummy, this isn't that difficult. You know, why limit this to one team? So it's nice to see that be a thing. Really makes more sense than anything I had, honestly. I was figuring they'd be like... Because the original bit, if you remember, they mentioned like, oh, they have advanced tech, and I was like, are they gonna have like Tau railguns? Because that's gonna be kind of weird. But they did do what I feel is a bit of a oopsie doopsie fucky wucky. The new lore, because remember they have an ion weapon, the new lore goes, oh yeah, they taught them, the Leagues of Votann, the dwarves, the squats, whatever you want to call them, taught the Tau about ion weaponry. I'm like, wait, what? You know, it's one of those things where I was very taken aback by it, because that just sounds really stupid. Because to me it gives the impression of like, oh, these factions are grossly incompetent. You know, all technology stems from this source, as opposed to just being like, yeah, these guys invented the same type at their own speed, which makes more sense. You know, it's kind of like, what was it? There was, I mean, the easiest thing would be like domestication of plants and whatnot. Or different, there's a few things throughout humanity's history where we've simultaneously created the same thing without any contact. You know, your options for how that came to be were either one progenitor group, you know, that starts leaning into like the lore of Atlanteans, giving everyone knowledge, aliens teaching people things, or people just kind of putting things together and realizing this works or this doesn't. And if you Occam's razor it, people just figuring stuff out is pretty reasonable. And it should kind of be applied here in 40K. You know, if I remember correctly, the Tau have like ion engines, because that's how they travel without using the warp to get places. It would be kind of dumb to be like, oh yeah, their use of ion weapons, even though they have these engines, is completely because another race taught them. It just seems weird, you know? It's cool to see this stuff, just that bit of lore really kinda... It doesn't ruin it. It'll take a lot more to ruin this faction already. It's just one of those things where I look at it and I'm like, was this needed? There was a few other bits that were announced. They didn't have any neat pictures or anything to go with it, but there was lore stating that members of the Leagues of Votann use plasma-bladed weaponry, so essentially lightsabers. Which on one hand, I was like, oh, cool. On the other hand, I kind of chuckled, because depending on how they go about it, they're gonna have to be careful based on like the look of the weapon and everything, otherwise they run the risk of a very easy Disney lawsuit. Or they just run the risk of looking really stupid. But it's interesting. There was also the infantry use hammers and sledges and stuff that have mass drivers built into them, which the first thing that came to my mind was, if you've played Killing Floor 2, there is a sledgehammer with a shotgun built into it, and you would do like your special overhead attack, and it would cause the firing pin to hit the shotgun shell, and then blast the target. And that's all I can think of. Which makes sense, because the other option would be they essentially have blunt versions of boarding axes. Which is equally cool, I'm not gonna lie. Boarding axes were a badass part of our history for weapons. But at the same time, I do think the idea of having just a shotgun built into the head of a sledgehammer is pretty neat. God, the lightsaber one though, I'm really wondering how they're gonna pull that off. Is it going to be like an officer weapon? I assume it's going to be an officer weapon. Because I can't imagine you're going to be using those too much elsewhere. There were other little bits of lore. Their equivalent of like a tech priest, I guess, is... What was it? It's pronounced broker. But it's got a bunch of umlauts and like a TH in there because dwarves and Norse spellings and Germanic stuff, they gotta just Flanderize the hell out of it. There was that. The armor set they use is referred... I believe it's the armor is referred to... It's an acronym that's essentially Hunter. It's all very... It's very simple when you start looking at it. You're like, oh, okay, this is the design choice you wanted to go with. Which is fine, you know, I'm not gonna rip on it too much. I think it's completely reasonable. You have a design choice, you have an art direction, you go with it. Admittedly, how far you go with it is the big question, but who am I to say? Yeah, I'm thinking next run I'm not gonna put the, whatchamacallit on here. Put all the modifiers. Because I know these missions get harder and harder, and these guys are very meaty, and if I get hit, I take a ton of damage. That 100% physical damage was kind of... It wasn't entirely a nail in the coffin, but it was definitely scary to put that on. I think what else? I think that was actually all of the lore off the top of my head. I had to quick look to. The only other thing was to modify gear. They use what is it? They use personal devices called anvil terminals. A-N-VYL. Once again, little nail on the head, but you know, art direction makes sense. I assume the brokers are equivalent tech priests. What's cool is they even mention, like, yeah, the soldiers are able to customize their loadouts. It's not as very bare bones as something like the Imperial Guard. You know, where it's just like, hey, soldier number 852739, why did you put a sight on your las rifle? You know, you're just a basic grunt, you don't get anything fancy. Do I think that's going to transfer to tabletop? No. God, no. That would be tedious to sit here and be like, okay, this guy has an underslung grenade launcher, but this guy doesn't, and this guy has this, and he also has this attachment that this guy doesn't, so I can reroll one dice roll because this guy has this. It would be... I would tear whoever I'm playing against if they're using it. I would tear their spine out. Like, I'm not sitting here for 45 minutes so dude can have one squad of 20 dwarves hit me. It gets tedious enough sometimes with people. We don't need to make it worse. But for lore, yeah, that's fine. It's cool. You know, adds a little bit. Really helps differentiate them from the guard. I have to go this way, because I know if I don't, I'm going to have to backtrack. Now comes the question of what is going to come next for the announcement. Because I have an idea. I want to know what you guys think, because I'll just say what I think right here and now. I think the next thing we're going to see is maybe another vehicle. It's a toss-up. It's either going to be another vehicle that gets shown, or the first hero. Or, honestly, any, like, headquarters unit. I think that'll be, like, the next possible things. Because it's important enough, but it doesn't mess things up, I'd say. Because we already had the scout vehicle, we had the infantry, so we have a little bit of like, hey, this is what your standard run-of-the-mill guys are going to be. Now would be the time to drop, like, here's like a lieutenant, or here's one of the HQ units, something important, and then go back to here's another type of infantry, here's a setup team, here's whatever. I also do like the look of the weapons, because they're dwarf enough. You know, one of them looks like it has like the dwarfy kind of metal plate you always see on stuff. Like you see it in, what's it called? Deep Rock Galactic. Some of the weapons have what boils down to being a, like a gold sigil plate put on their armor, or on their weapon specifically, and it works. It looks cool, it fits aesthetically, and that's what it looks like we're seeing. All of that did not look like it was worthwhile, but I do like getting that little event because that pays out immensely. I did see people, this was a bit of an old thing, but people were talking about it'd be nice, not related to Leagues of Votann, but kind of is the fact that some vehicles, especially for Space Marines, are very arbitrary in what you can fit in them. You know, some Land Raiders, it's like, yeah, you can fit Terminators, but you can't put Space Marines. You know, your standard TAC squad won't fit. You know, people were asking, you know, why is that? Which I think is a good question. It's a very arbitrary and kind of stupid way of preventing people from using these vehicles, and it would help a lot with some vehicles that aren't as popular. And I think it'd be cool to, you know, use the Leagues of Votann even as a test bed to be like, hey, can we just let people have the freedom to put what they want where they want? Or like load up vehicles as they wish? Because it just seems really poor decision making to not let people do that. You know, if you want to put your guys in a vehicle that's going to explode and kill them in the process unless you make a very specific roll, that's on you, my guy, you know. Who am I and who is Games Workshop to tell someone not to do something stupid? You know, sometimes people just gotta learn. Ah, there's so many enemies, we don't even get a counter yet. I do wonder though, because when you look at how, like the fact that the Hearth can have 30, or not 30, 20 guys, up to 20 guys in a squad. I've flubbed that sentence so many times. I do wonder, are they going to have, you know, Imperial Guard style setup teams? Or is it going to be more in line with like Devastators? Because I could see either or working, it's just which do you go with? Because they're both... I can make an argument for either or. The Hearthkins seem intelligent enough to have developed, like the SP conversion beam and stuff. They're smart enough to make what seems to be somewhat lightweight weapons. So a dev squad style setup of like, hey, these guys are pretty mobile, makes sense. In the same vein, they're smart enough they could make lightweight, heavy weapons that, yes, require a setup team or require you to, wheel a vehicle in kind of like how a Pack 40 is. Either one makes sense, it's just how they're utilized. And I feel like that's kind of the whole thing, is just we don't know enough about how things are going to work out to say for certain if they're going to work out. Because as it stands, they seem to be... I'm going to venture a guess and say it's going to be set up teams like IG. For the simple fact that because of their infantry numbers, the fact their weaponry seems to be, improved IG/AdMech, I think they're going to, for the most part, be a heavier version of Imperial Guard. What that means for actual Imperial Guard, I don't know. I'm really hoping it means they're getting better everything. They need to get some buffs, otherwise it's gonna be another, well, why would I use these guys if these guys are clearly the superior faction? And 40K does not need that. The tabletop does not need that kind of just blatant imbalance. That's not a bad purity seal. But that is all for now. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit the like button. It helps out the channel a lot. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.